Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another one in our series of ESTA interviews. This morning, we're going to be describing a roadmap to health and how to get and stay well. I'm talking to Charles Tisdal, osteopath, acupuncturist, and director of Datalands Clinic, a multidisciplinary natural health centre in Lancaster, one of the largest in the UK. Charles founded Datalands Clinic in 1988, where he's worked as a practitioner for 33 years. Following the rapid success of the clinic, and in the light of the BMA's recommendations for centres of excellence in alternative medicine, Charles was invited to the House of Commons to address the then Conservative Backbench Health Committee on a framework for health. During his career, he's conducted in the region of 90,000 individual consultations with people, presenting a wide range of health problems. Today, we're drawing on that experience. We're going to ask him what he can share with us about the roadmap to health. Charles, good morning.
Good morning.
Would you like to give us a little bit of a background and tell us what qualifies you to talk about such matters?
Yes, well, I have a background in education, although I am first and foremost a practitioner. I started life as a teacher, so I have a certificate of education from Loughborough Colleges. I have a degree in philosophy of education from Exeter University. I'm a member of the British Medical Acupuncture Society. I'm a member of the General Osteopathic Council. And as you said, I've treated a lot of patients over the years. And it's that experience really which has given me a platform from which I'd like to speak and talk about a roadmap for health. As I say, essentially I'm a practitioner. But what that experience of treating has given me is empirical research, if you like. It's a lot of stories, a lot of people, and I think a deep understanding of what people need in order to get well and stay well. I'd quite like to start this by talking about where we are now in terms of healthcare provision, and then working down to the roadmap. So if I could just start with a quote from Lord Nigel Crisp, who the other day said that the NHS can do repairs, but it can't tackle causes. And I think we have to agree with that. And of course, all of us would want to do what's currently being discussed, which is to save the NHS. So the NHS can do repairs. And what that suggests to me is that people are building up health problems without necessarily knowing it, and then reaching a crisis point. And the NHS is picking up the acute stuff. The causes come before that, and it's the causes that we're really interested in. This is about helping people to understand how to be well, how to understand what the process of being well is. And my feeling is that there isn't enough material which can be delivered to people to help them understand how to be well.
Okay. It sounds like you're almost saying that we need to be taught how to be and stay well and become well. Almost as if we don't have that license already. I mean, do you think in some ways we've kind of given the license for responsibility for our health over to organisations like the NHS?
Yes, I do, and I think that's been an evolutionary process, and I think it came about because of the progress which was made with drugs and the investment which was made by America and Russia into science and technology during the time of the space race, and when we got drugs which helped the world's armies to be cured of syphilis, and it was like a target pill, that kind of set the tone. And so we've been looking for target pills ever since. And the doctor's surgery is where you go to get that pill. So the responsibility is very much in the GP practice or with the NHS. and we've rather lost in the home the knowledge and the wherewithal to understand how to be well. So we need to rediscover that knowledge really, and then give it back to the people so that they can address the causes rather than being, you know, victims of acute healthcare in hospitals.
Right. So what would you say the causes of ill health are?
Well, if I could just give you an example, then let's take diabetes. Yeah. So diabetes is a tolerance of insulin, and which stops the sugar being carried into the muscles and the liver, and causes problems with, you know, blindness and leg ulcers, and it costs the NHS a lot of money every year. But type 2 diabetics don't need to be type 2 diabetics. It can be cured completely through a combination of diet, exercise, good sleep, and various other measures. So if we look at diabetes and then we look at heart disease and cancers, together, according to Diabetes UK, Cancer Research, and the British Heart Foundation, together that's costing the NHS £70 billion a year. £70 billion a year. These are lifestyle problems and should be addressed before they reach the acute stage. So right. The question is, you know, what is it we should be telling people in order to address these problems? And that's what I hope we have an answer for today.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I'm acutely aware of is the way that the cures that you know, the drugs that are available to people, they often have side effects, and people are often on multiple drug regimes. I mean, you might recall I brought somebody to you a while back who was on about 10 different medications, and after one treatment with you, they were able to come off about 5 of those medications. They had reached a point where they were exhausted simply by their bodies coping with that level of medication. And then I did a freedom of information request on those 5 that they dropped. And a year's supply of those medications came to £1,000. So it was a cost of £1,000 to the NHS there, which one treatment with you actually saved the NHS not £1,000, but it also, I mean, this person who could hardly walk before she came to you, the week after she came to an event and she was dancing. It was incredible. So that's when I realized that there is so much that can be done for people, which is non-invasive and which can make a profound difference to our health from a therapeutic point of view, which doesn't rely on expensive drug regimes and the potential side effects.
Yes, I mean, it's a great story, and what it illustrates is that, you know, GPs, while they're doing a great job a lot of the time, they're rather limited in what they can do, and what they are doing is manipulating people's physiologies with drugs which have side effects, as you say, rather than doing what we would like to do, which is to support the body's own processes for achieving wellness.
Right.
And it's the understanding of those processes and what is required, which is so important. So a starting point for building this roadmap, if you like, would be to accept that the body is designed to repair and regenerate. And once we accept that, we then need to try and understand what it needs. Now, the great thing about this is that you don't have to understand the human body to be able to support it. You don't have to be an expert in physiology or anatomy, but what you do have to do is ask the question, what does the human being need in order to be healthy? And what these consultations over the last 33 years have taught me is that people fall into dysfunction in a number of areas. So the roadmap that we're talking about is basically, if you like, an academic would call it a heuristic device. We could call it a list. It's basically a list of areas that people need to address in order to support all those complex body mechanisms. And it's not good enough just to address one of them, like diet, for example, because if your diet's excellent and you're not sleeping properly, then you're going to fall into malfunction. So the question is, apart from diet and sleep, what areas need to be addressed? Now, if we take a more easily understood example, like a plant, for example, if you're growing sweet peas or carrots in the garden, you know that they require a certain amount of light and nutrients and water, okay? And if you give those in the right proportions, your carrots and your sweet peas will look very good and they'll thrive. But if you give it in the wrong proportions, they won't thrive and they could die. But while human beings are more complicated, the same is true. If we understand the different things that the human being needs in order to be well, then we can give them in the right proportions. And because the body's designed to maintain and repair, we just leave it to do its job, which is different to trying to manipulate its physiology using refined drugs.
Yeah, I can see how that approach, it wouldn't solve all problems and all health problems, but it would go a long way towards warding off the onset of lots of problems which then land on the doormat of the NHS or the local GPs. So it's almost begging the question actually to what, because you mentioned a list there, what would you have in that list?
Well, I have 7 things in the list, and maybe we could just say a little bit about each of them. So we could take diet, for example, which is the obvious one. And if we could just give people a little bit of information about diet, so that they've got something to work with. Now, one of the most important things about food is knowing that when you don't have too much of it, your body goes into repair mode, goes into autophagy, and it stops producing new cells and looks after the ones it's already got. Now, that is a really powerful mechanism. And if people knew about it and used it, a lot of health problems would improve enormously. I got an email yesterday from a friend of mine who overheard a conversation I was having with somebody else in a car park. And she wrote to me to say, I'd like you to know that we heard about you talking to so-and-so about the 5 and 2, which is Michael Mosley's diet. And since we overheard that conversation, we looked into it. My husband has lost 25 pounds. And I've lost, she said, 11 pounds. Now, by losing that weight, they have dropped out of the risk factors for heart disease, diabetes, and cancers. And if people know how to drop out of those risk factors, why wouldn't they do it? And why wouldn't we want to tell people how to do it? And that's just diet. There's other things are important too. So, for example, when you're asleep, and only when you're asleep, are certain hormones released which help with the metabolism of insulin, and it helps with weight control. So sleeping well is very, very important for your health. And giving people a little bit of information about the benefits of sleep would be useful in terms of helping people to take responsibility for their own well-being. So we've talked about 2 things there. We've talked about diet and we've talked about sleep. So, from that, the question I would like to ask people is, apart from diet and sleep, what other things do you need in order to be well? Well, I can save you some time and answer that question for you, because I've had the privilege of talking to so many people over the years about what's wrong with them.
Right. Well, we're all very time poor, Charles. So please go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll come back to Lord Nigel Crisp, because he was also going on to say that we want to mobilise health, and we need health innovation. And we need health innovation platforms. And I agree with that, but once we've got those platforms, what are we going to say to people? You know, what are we going to give them to talk about? So that's why we're having this conversation now. So he talked about housing, and he said, well, you know, this is not about public health. It's not a political issue for public health. They shouldn't be talking to people about health just by themselves. It should be everybody, you know, it should be teachers and architects, town planners. They should all be aware that with housing, for example, there needs to be enough light, there needs to be open spaces, access to green places, because people understand that there are psychological and physical benefits to be had by planning housing issues in the right way.
So you're talking about the environment we live in there can have a beneficial or a detrimental effect on our health. And I mean, just so people know, just for context, we're doing this interview as we're about to go into year 2 of the COVID crisis, and it's become very apparent during the year the difference between people who are locked into a poor living situation and those who are locked into better living situations with more access to countryside walks, etc., etc., and that makes a profound difference, not just on their, well, particularly on their psychological well-being as well.
Yes, well, why does it make a profound difference? And you're right, because it affects not only our physical health but our mental health too. And GP surgeries are now giving green referrals. You know, in other words, they're making it possible for people to go and work in copsing, for example, outside, led by some kind of key worker. And so people are getting the benefit of being outside working in nature, which is how we evolved as Homo sapiens. And going back to that triggers a lot of those positive responses. So yes, so the word environment, which you used, is another one on our list. So we've now got diet, sleep, and environment. Don't forget, with environment also, you know, sunlight is a natural antibiotic, as is oxygen. It's a natural antibiotic. So to be outside is to it's to be healthier. Now, when my father came out of hospital a few years ago with MRSA, we sat him in the garden, and after 2 days, his MRSA had gone because of the natural effects of oxygen and sunlight. Incidentally, sunlight, early morning sunlight, also triggers the pineal gland in such a way that it helps you to sleep better at night. So these little bits of information would be helpful to people in order to help them to sleep better and to be healthier.
Yes. Well,
what should we be putting together? What should we be putting together to give to people?
Absolutely, and I'm sure it would be useful if these things were a central part of education of children as well. I mean, really basic things about how the world works, or how you work, or how your body works, or what we need to be healthy seems like a no-brainer. I mean, that may already be there, I don't know, but I suspect it's not there nearly enough.
Well, personal health education takes place in the schools, but I'm not sure that the people who are teaching it have the kind of depth of understanding that healthcare providers like myself have. And I would like to share with them what I think should be in their curriculum. And it's very straightforward. You know, it's not rocket science. As I say, it's just basic knowledge. But that basic knowledge is so important, because without it, we're going to continue to have diabetes, heart disease, and cancers in large numbers.
I think one of the problems, Charles, is that we tend to, and we've got a very complicated society. There's lots of moving parts in it. It's very complex, and we tend to sort of hand over responsibility for large parts of our lives and our functioning to external sources. And I'm strongly of the opinion that we could in-house a huge number of things back into. There is this term that Carl Rogers came up with in terms of the founder of person-centered counselling, about our locus of authority, where we place our authority, where is the center of our authority. And for a lot of the time, for a lot of us, it's out there somewhere. And he was very big on bringing that locus of authority, he calls it the locus of evaluation or self-evaluation, back to inside ourselves, you know, sort of taking back control, if you like, to coin a phrase, of our own lives, in the sense of taking responsibility for what we do. And a lot of these things, like the way you're describing them, we've had conversations before. I think the key is to take something which appears to be a very complex situation and to find the key points, which when you speak about them, it can be done in quite a simple way, but they're actually potentially quite profound, lead to profound changes.
Well, yes, I mean, the 7 principles of health are terribly simple, but they are terribly profound, because without them, you wouldn't know how to get your health back and keep it.
Okay, so we've talked about 3. We've talked about diet, sleep, and the environment. So what are the other 4?
Well, another obvious one is exercise, and the benefits of exercise are many and various. I'm sure you don't need me to be too technical about it, but I will say that some research was done recently on an 80-year-old gentleman, and they took his bloods and found that he had as many T cells in his bloods as a 30-year-old man, and that's because he exercises. So his T cells are going to protect him from viruses and bacteria, and he will have a good immune system. Now that's very important at the moment with this coronavirus about. So older people are more vulnerable because their immune systems are low. People with comorbidities, heart disease, cancer treatments and so on, their systems will be reduced in terms of immunity also. So for those of us who can exercise, and particularly older people, it's really good to boost your wellness and at the same time your immune strength by exercising. So regular daily exercise will protect you and keep you well. So yes, exercise is important, and we could talk about the technicalities of that and the physiology of that to whatever depth is appropriate for the kind of audience we're talking to, whether it's school children or whether it's trainee PE teachers or whatever. So we can always go into an appropriate level of depth with these 7 principles.
Right. Okay. So now we've got 4. We've got diet, yes. Sleep, yes. Exercise. That's a bit of an obvious one, really. The environment, and I'm also aware that we probably collectively don't seek as many opportunities to find environments that are healthy as we could. So that's another one. So now I'm trying to rack my brains to think what else would be on that list.
Well, I'm very clear that joint mobility is one of the 7 principles of health, and I say that because of my experience as an osteopath over all those years. But I do know that if you become tight in your spine, it can inhibit nerve supply and blood supply to structures which they're supposed to be innervating, and that tightness can lead to a reduction in vitality in your metabolism. I could give you an example of that, otherwise it's perhaps a little bit difficult to explain. If we take fertility, for example, now some women, some couples find it hard to conceive. Maybe because it's a low sperm count for the male. Maybe it's to do with the female not having the right environment to keep an egg. So a toxic environment is not going to allow her to keep a baby necessarily. So the first thing to do would be to detoxify, do the basic cleaning out of the body systems. But I have evidence to show that women who've been for osteopathic treatment, who've done all the basic things properly and haven't conceived, do manage to conceive when they've had their spines adjusted. So at the level of your mid-back, if you like, sort of D12 to L1, which is where your ribs end and your lumbar spine starts, that's the innervation to the reproductive organs. If that area is tight and the nerve supply is not allowed to run freely to those structures, it can inhibit conception. So I've had phone calls from couples saying, you know, since my wife's back has been adjusted, she's been able to conceive. So that's just an example of joint mobility being really important. The number of people I treat with headaches, you know, because their necks are tight and it's blocking the the blood supply and the nerve supply to the head, and it's mechanically uncomfortable. And when you release that through stretching, soft tissue work, acupuncture, manipulations, people get better, you know. So joint mobility is has a very clear place on that list of 7.
Right. Wow. No, that's not what I can relate to those so far as my knees. I mean, my knees are okay, but I'm looking after them because I'm terribly aware of the fact that, you know, if you know something happens that severely restricts you. Once your joints become difficult to knees, elbows, neck, they're really obvious ones, but you're talking about the whole spine, fluidity in the spine as a whole, the skeleton as a whole. You know, once you've got restrictions or severe restrictions, it has other effects. It immediately limits you in lots of ways. So I can see that one being important. So so now we've got 5: diet, sleep, exercise, environment, and joint mobility. So now I'm scratching my head to think what on earth the other remaining two could be.
Okay, I'll just go back to joint mobility before I move on and talk about your knees for a moment. Your knees have a nerve supply and a blood supply, which comes from your lumbar spine. Your knees are also mechanically dependent on your pelvis and low back. So as an osteopath, I would never treat your knees without treating your back first and making sure that you've got the mechanical advantage of your lumbar spine and pelvis working as they should do, and that you've got a free nerve supply and blood supply going to your knees. And it is my experience, and it's in the theory books as well, I'm pleased to say, that if you treat a low back, the knee problem often improves to the point where you don't need to treat it independently.
Right. Well, what I was saying was I actually don't have a knee problem. I mean, one of the things that I've done for the last 10 years is I have a standing desk, so I have not sat down to you know, work the old keyboards for at least a decade, and that is definitely makes a difference. And I'm aware that there are millions of people who really, everybody should be standing up to work, because really it makes you know, sit down for a break. Don't stand up for a break, sit down for a break. And I'm just aware of those millions of workers who punish their lower backs by sitting all day hunched over a keyboard. So I thought I would throw that in as an observation.
Well, I'm certainly seeing a lot of, you know, in recent months with everybody working from home, I'm seeing a lot more of the kind of problems which present as a result of sitting for too long.
I know that would affect chair sales of office chairs, but who cares? You know, we need to be reducing how much stuff we produce anyway. We've got a climate emergency to deal with, so let's all stand up and have better health and a better planet at the same time. Okay, so now, so what, we've got 2 left. I am still racking my brains to know what they are.
Okay, well, the next one on the list is stress management. Okay, we need stress in order to grow. So, for example, when you go to the gym, when you exercise, you thicken the cortex of your bones and you improve your heart and lungs and so on. If you do too much exercise, that can become counterproductive and you end up with strains and damage. The same is true psychologically for us. You know, if we need a challenge to get our systems going and to help us respond to our environments and develop our personalities. But too much stress can lead to exhaustion, depression, and so on. Now, we all lead very busy lives. We have mortgages, children, cars, all sorts of things to look after. It's really important that on the road to wellness, we understand that that balance has to be correct. We have to have an understanding of how much stress is good for us and where it becomes dangerous. So mental health issues are very prominent at the moment. Managing the stress which creates those kind of issues is a technique or an understanding or an awareness that people deserve to be given and supported with. So I would put stress management on my list of 7 principles in order to help whatever community groups we're talking to understand.
Well, to my mind, stress management, I wouldn't classify it as on a personal level. Yes, I mean, we can control anxieties, we can stop worrying about things we can't do anything about. There's a whole load of personal tools, but I think there's quite a large role there. It's a social thing. I think collectively, we can up or lower our collective stress levels. We put stress on each other through our institutions, through the way we operate. So I would imagine that that's one that the whole community needs to get behind addressing.
Yeah.
Right. So one left, and I genuinely can't think of what it could be.
Well, we talked about plants earlier on. What makes us different from plants and animals is the ability to be aware of our own consciousness, and that complexity of our psychoemotional domain, the area of consciousness, mentality, personality. I hesitate to use the word spirituality because of its religious connotations, but that higher echelon of thinking where we appreciate art and aesthetics, which makes us very different to the organic or animal kingdom. But in that area, and I'm going to call it the psychoemotional domain, okay? It's important that that psychoemotional domain is in balance. And it's similar, if you like, to Maslow's hierarchy. He talks about the need for affiliation. And in my experience, the 2 areas where people fall down most and end up on my treatment couch with stress and neck and shoulder problems or whatever, diaphragm tightness, the 2 areas where they fall down is money and relationships. So having financial frameworks in place, which people are comfortable with, and being able to give and take love and affection comfortably. So those 2 areas are what I've seen over the years are the main contributors to a disturbance in principle number 7, which is the psychoemotional domain.
Okay, you're going to have to unpack that a little bit more for me, Charles, because I'm not quite making the connections between money, relationship dynamics, and a deeper awareness of one's what I would call one's inner life.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is an interesting point you bring up because it's challenging me to organize the 7 principles. Now, other people may look at this and say, well, we could organize it a different way. And organizing knowledge, epistemology, is something to be debated. And we could debate the 7 principles and organize them differently and challenge them. And I'd like to do that. And in a sense, you've challenged me this morning just by asking me that question. The psychoemotional domain is that area of a human being which is not physical, all right? It's to do with psychology and independent thinking and consciousness. And there are a lot of health problems which can take root in that part of human makeup.
Yes,
and I'm struggling to articulate it, and that's because it's difficult to describe and it's complex. But if you talk to talking therapists or hypnotherapists or doctors of clinical psychology, I'm sure they will agree that people's history of trauma, history of relationships, history of struggling with money leads to health problems. And if we can provide some kind of support for people to understand those mechanisms and how that can lead to dysfunction, then that can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I can probably throw a little bit of light on that, because that is an area that I've spent some time on. I got a bit of expertise in, and as a member of the Ethical Small Traders Association, our network, you'll be aware that we have 4 bottom lines. We have a quadruple bottom line framework. We have the traditional, well, I say traditional triple bottom line, which is your financial resource bottom line, your environmental and your social impact, which is fairly well established now. But I did add a 4th bottom line, which was a recognition of the importance of lifelong learning and personal self-development. And that was a doorway for people to implicitly recognize that, well, if we're on a journey, if we're still developing as people, if we're constantly learning, then we're not there yet. We're not a finished product. We don't have all the answers. We don't know everything. We're a work in progress. Therefore, it's okay to question things, to admit that there's stuff that we don't know. It opens the door to that psychological domain, that's which allows that sort of inner dialogue or that to share a process by which we can, what I call it enhancing our self-reflective toggle. So imagine the process of self-reflection. And if you look at Carl Rogers, coming back to Carl Rogers, who identifies 7 stages of psychological process or psychological development. And in the early stages, it's very, very difficult to get that self-reflection going. We tend to blame other people. It's the government, it's the blah, 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 whoever. It's, there's my lad would be fine if it wasn't for X, Y, and Z. But as we progress and we exercise that self-reflective capacity, we start to take on the responsibility more and more for our own self, to the point where it becomes second nature to do that. So if we're in a situation with somebody with different points of view or perspective, rather than just automatically defending ourselves, we'll become curious to know, well, this is interesting. Well, what's your view of this situation? And we're open to learning and changing and transforming all the time. So in fact, I have a saying now, which is in response to the multiple problems that need to be addressed, globally and financially and on every front now. There's no point in just rushing out to fix things on the outside unless you do some inner work first, because nothing's really going to change on the outside if it doesn't change on the inside first.
Very profound, Michael.
Well, that's extremely kind of you. And so I would definitely, yes, I would give a big endorsement to that being one of those 7. So there we go.
It is the most difficult to explain and work into. But I suppose in summary, what we need to point out is that these 7 principles are just an idea. They could be organized differently, but it's a start to understanding what we need to be giving people. When we're talking about health innovation and health innovation pathways, we need to be putting the right information into that pathway. So whether this is a teacher in school, whether it's a key worker talking to a group of diabetics, they need to have an understanding of the whole framework. It's no good just talking about calorie restricting to diabetics. They need to understand the other 6 principles. It's not just diet.
Right. So what do you want to do with these? I mean, what's the next step? Because you've really described one of these platforms that you mentioned earlier, and I agree with you. This is a great platform. So what's the next step for you?
Well, the next step is to understand how this information can be used by agents of change. And so we need to reimagine how things can change, how things can reform, how health can change and respond to our difficult environment at the moment. My preference would be, for courses to be run in schools, for courses to be run for people that doctors are referring to different establishments. So when people are coming to doctors with lifestyle problems, rather than giving them drugs, they could be sending them off to seminars to be talked to by key workers. I think there's all sorts of ways of bringing essential knowledge in, but it would be really helpful if those who are in charge of public health and politics closer to government could facilitate that. We should be talking to people like Professor Chris Whitty about health innovation. Now, Professor Chris Whitty is head of the British Health Research Foundation, but I haven't heard him talk about the process of health. I've heard him talk about PPE and vaccines and social distancing. But as somebody who's an expert in the health process, I'm a bit disappointed that he hasn't talked about the kind of things that we've talked about this morning.
Well, I haven't heard him talk about how urgent it is for people, for example, to boost their immune systems through doing some of these basic things that everybody can do. That's true. Maybe we can get that message to him somehow, along with other people, of course. I feel that we've covered quite a lot, but we've hardly scratched the surface. And I think we're ending at a place where really what you're saying is that there's quite a good foundation here, and it's fairly simple to get your head around these. It's not rocket science, but the implications of doing so can be quite profound in terms of the effect they could have on general population health. And how do we connect with those people in our community who are in a position to help promote these 7 principles or variants thereof, almost as a matter of urgency?
Absolutely. I mean, and whatever you might think of our Prime Minister, if I could spend 10 minutes with him and explain to him the consequences of running out an education program with the 7 principles of health, he could have his name down in history for saving the NHS. Because in 10 years' time, if people were putting into practice the kind of things we're talking about today, the NHS would be much more relaxed. It wouldn't be dealing with so many acute problems.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. It's been absolutely fascinating. Always good to talk to you, and I look forward to the next occasion.
Thank you, Michael.